Okay, so now we're going to talk about absolute maxima or minima. Um, if it's absolute for your one function, you can only have one. Okay, so we're talking about the highest point or the lowest point, outputs. Okay, well, let's look at a graph. So let's say we have a graph something like this. And let's say this point right here is 0, 4, something like that. Well, that is the highest point on the graph. The absolute highest output we're getting would be 4. So 4 would be the absolute max. Okay, and you might say, well, wasn't it a local max? Well, you can call it that as well, but it's better to say it's an absolute maximum, or maximum, yeah, because that's more definitive, okay? So it gives you a better idea of what the picture looks like. So that's the highest point we're getting off that graph, and it's considered an absolute maximum, okay? Now let's say we have something like, let's say you have a graph something like this. So you can say, oh, I see some local maxes and some local mins or something like that. But there is an absolute minimum right here. That is the lowest point. So, there aren't any outputs lower than that one. That would be called an absolute min. Okay, and whatever that output is. So, I didn't put it on a piece of graph paper, so I can't read that, but they'll tell you the output, they can tell you that point. Now, is there an absolute maximum? And the answer is no, there's not an absolute maximum. Because see this arrow right here? That says outputs can keep going up and up and up. Infinity is not an absolute. And so there is no absolute max for that graph. So now you might be saying, well, what about over here? Did that have an absolute minimum? No, there's no absolute minimum. Okay? So sometimes they have one and sometimes they don't have one. Okay? All right. You can read a little bit more about this in your textbook, but we'll do an example here. Now notice that this is a closed interval. It's not going off to infinity in either direction. Okay? And you can say, well, I see some, local maxes and mins. Is there an absolute maximum? Let's start with the maximum. Absolute maximum. Is there a highest point? And if so, what is that highest point? Well, there's actually two of them, right? There's one right there and one right there. They both have an output of 16. That is the highest output for this graph. So it's 16. That's the absolute maximum. So say this was a graph determining your company's profits, well, and millions or something. And so the absolute maximum profit was 16. That's what we're saying there. Okay. Is there an absolute minimum? So now you're saying, is there a lowest point? There is a lowest point. Now don't get tricked by this. The lowest output is right here. That's the absolute minimum. It doesn't continue on toward infinity, right? It's stopping right there. But that is the lowest output we're getting. What is it? The book says it's about -10. My graph kind of looks like -11 maybe, but that's the absolute minimum then for that graph. Okay, so if it was your company and now they're losing money, that was the most money they were going to lose was -10 million. That wouldn't be good. Okay, anyway, and other examples you could think of probably. So it's tempting to use that 0, 0 point as an absolute maximum or minimum, but it's not the highest output or the highest or the lowest output. So what is that point right there? It's a local minimum. oops, I put at and I didn't want to put that. There's a local minimum at 0. The local minimum of 0 occurs at 0. They didn't ask for the local ones, they just wanted absolute ones, but that's the difference, okay? So it's easy to get caught on that because you might have just been drawn to that local minimum, but it's just a local minimum, it's not the absolute minimum, okay? All right. You have to practice with them.